and welcome to our continuing study of the biblical book of Ruth. Tonight we'll begin studying chapter 2, which is the story of a classical romance, a man and a woman falling in love. All the elements are there. This is a biblical romance about 3,300 years ago. Let me begin by bringing you up to speed with what happened in our first study, chapter 1. In that, we hear the story of a man and a wife, Elimelech and his wife Naomi, who hit upon some hard times in their hometown of Bethlehem. And because God has sent a famine upon the land, they journey eastward toward the land of Moab, southern Jordan. Moab was not a very pretty country in those days. It's not a very lush garden spot today either. But in the time of this story, it was a place that God himself described in Psalm 118, I believe. He said, "Moab is my washing pot." Another way of saying that is, Moab is my garbage can. It was a grim place, but in those days it was a lot better than Naomi and Elimelech could find in their homeland. So they leave Bethlehem in Judah and travel eastward, and there their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, we'll talk a little bit more about their names later, their two sons find wives, Moabite women for wives, but then within 10 years, both Elimelech and the two sons of Elimelech, Mahlon and Chilion, they die, they pass away. And so Ruth now is going to return to Judah because she hears that the Lord has had mercy on his people and the rains have returned. So she begins to travel west, and she begins the journey with her two daughters-in-law with her, Orpah and Ruth. They don't go very far. They come about to the border of Israel, and Naomi turns to them and says, "You should return home now. Go back to your cities, go back to your families, go back to your gods, go back to your turf so you can meet some young men and settle down and be married and have the rest of your life with the security of a husband." One of them, Orpah, agrees to that and returns home, but Ruth, using some of the most stirring words in Scripture, makes a declaration to Naomi that she is bound to Naomi. She says, "Where you will go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And where you die, I also shall die." So they return to Bethlehem, city of David as we know it, in time for the barley harvest, the first harvest of the year. And there, in Naomi's house, wherever she and Ruth were living at that period of time, it appears that that family had leased out their property because they did not return to the property. I imagine that when Elimelech went to prepare for his journey east, he leased out the property that he had in Israel, thinking that either a year of Jubilee would come by the time he needed restoring and the property would be given back to him, or perhaps not, but he would strike it rich in Moab and return and ransom his own fields. But Elimelech's life, unfortunately, ended before that could happen. So Naomi and Ruth are back in Judah. They're living in the city of Bethlehem. They're living in pretty abject poverty. There are no men in the household. There are no men to go out and earn. There are no men to go out and harvest. There are no men to stay and protect them either. And that's where we begin chapter 2, verse 1. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. When it says clan here, a clan is essentially a large family, usually a powerful, wealthy family. Its extended family, that is, with its servants there and the families of those servants, all of the people that would surround a wealthy man who lived in a sort of pueblo-like place in the country. That man would own the fields, he would own the vineyards, he would own the animals that were raised on that farm. And when he grew old and prepared to go and sleep with his fathers, he would call in one of his sons, normally the eldest one, and give him the blessing. That is, he put that son to be in charge of the inheritance for the period of his life. And then after he grows old, he will do the same. Pass it on to the son who will inherit his wealth. And now verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I found favor." Now we see that Ruth has taken the time to study the law of Moses. And she knows, as recorded in Leviticus chapter 19, I believe verses 9 and 10, she knows that the Israelites were instructed by God not to totally glean their fields. Glean means to completely take all of the produce, all of the grain, whatever was grown there, completely take every piece of it away. But God had instead instructed the nation Israel that when they harvested a field, they were not to harvest in the corners. They were to make their harvesting speed and not break it to go back and pick up any other grain that they'd noticed they'd missed. Also, if they're looking back and they see a sheaf of grain standing up, they're not to go backward and pick it up. God said those grains, those fruits, those row crops will be left there for the benefit of whatever widows, whatever strangers, whatever travelers were going through the area to be able to take their repast. And Ruth knows this, and she asked permission of her mother-in-law, Naomi, to go and do exactly that, to harvest in the field to glean in the field behind the harvesters who were taking it. It shows that she, undoubtedly, she's already speaking in Hebrew language. She has learned their customs. She's already made the declaration that she herself will become with them. So she's not a standoffish person at all. She's not a person who's proud and wants to tell you, isn't it annoying when somebody who comes from another city comes out to visit you, and when you take them somewhere, they say, well, that's not how we do it in my city. Ruth has determined that she is going to follow the customs and the culture and the faith of the Israelites. Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." Verse 3. So she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Do you think that's just a happenstance? No. God is beginning to work on a plan of salvation thousands of years before we'll see the result. God is already in action on this. It was not happenstance. It was not a happy coincidence. This is what we sometimes call a God incident. Naomi said to her, "Go, my daughter." 3. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, from the clan of Elimelech. That's her clan, by marriage to Elimelech. Verse 4, Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "Adonai Alechem, the Lord be with you." And they greet him back, "And the Lord bless you." Isn't that a wonderful way to greet your workers and be in return greeted by them? 5. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters. He asked his foreman, he says, "Whoa, who does that young woman belong to?" And you'll notice Boaz is a very direct man. He sees this younger woman, Ruth, laboring in the field, and he is from the very beginning taken with her. He puts his eyes upon her and he falls in love. Do you believe in love at first sight? I do. Sometimes it happens. So he doesn't ask his foreman, "Hey, what did she drive into work today?" He says, "Who does she belong to?" Before you form the erroneous thought that Hebrew women were bought and sold like slaves, that is not at all the case. The translation just doesn't do this justice. You see, a woman is always under protection. When she's a young child, she is under the protection of her father. When she gets older and she gets a mate, she gets a husband, then she is under the protection of the husband. And in her later years, when her husband passes away, she's hoping to have sons who then will protect her and provide for her. So when he asks, who does she belong to, what he's really saying is, who's responsible for this woman? The overseer replied, verse 6, the overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." 7, she said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Now, I live in an agricultural county, and many people work in the fields with the row crops. We have a lot of strawberries where I live. We have a lot of wine grapes that need harvesting. And many people work in those fields, and I'll tell you what, it's a hard job. Whether it's cold or hot in weather, you'll always see them wrapped around totally in clothes because they have to keep their body moisture with them. You couldn't go out in shorts and a t-shirt and pick crops in the sun. You would soon be a withered grape yourself. Very raisin-like. But one thing I have noticed is that field workers find it necessary to take frequent breaks. I think that they all hydrate, they all get something cool to drink, and take a few minutes where they can stand up straight and sit up straight rather than bend over into the crops. And so that's the situation that's happening there. And what Boaz foreman says is, you know what? She only took one break. She's been working here with us since morning, which means since dawn. And I've only seen her take one short break. So he is impressed. He's impressed by the amount of work, the energy that this woman has. We don't know Ruth's age at this point. We can speculate that it was in the late 20s or perhaps 30s. After all, she had been married for a period of time. And we do know that Boaz is a little bit older than her. That will come into play. So, verse 8. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. You see what he's saying? He said, you stay right here, honey. You stay with my workers. You stay in my fields and my crops, and you'll make out pretty well for yourself. He said, stay here with the women who work for me. Verse 9, watch the field where my men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. I'll bet he did. You keep your pea-picking fingers off of that woman because I want to talk to her later on. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled. You know, it's quite a lot of trouble to fill water jars and then to carry them back. This is done for the benefit of his workers, but now Boaz is extending this hospitality to Ruth. Already he's begun to give her what it is he possesses. Verse 10, at this she bowed down with her face to the ground. Is that humility or what? She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Well, I can tell you right now why she had found such favor. She was a beautiful woman. She had the sort of glamour that is both internal and without. You could look at her and see her beauty, but as you got to know her, you saw the real source of her beauty was her heart. Verse 11, Boaz replied, that is to Ruth, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before me. 12, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. 13. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. For you have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. 15. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. 16. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up and don't rebuke her. 17. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley that she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. That's about 5/6 of a bushel, I believe. Something like that, some fraction of a bushel, a good pile of grain. Then she threshed the barley that she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. You see that? She cut her mother-in-law in on the roasted grain and maybe even a couple sops with the wine vinegar. 19. Her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed is the man who took notice of you. This old woman, Naomi, has some very strong insight. She kind of puts two and two together and figures out that somebody is stoking Ruth's fire here. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I work for today is Boaz, she said. Verse 20. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Guardian redeemers. Another expression of that thought is kinsman redeemer. It's called in Hebrew goel. Goel. The kinsman redeemer. We'll certainly be discussing that in greater detail. 21. Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" 22. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." 23. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished. In other words, she stays there through the spring, through the summer, and into the early autumn when the wheat harvest comes, 50 weeks after the day we call Resurrection Day. So Ruth stayed close to the woman of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Thank you once again for joining us in our study of the book of Ruth. I hope to see you for our next lesson, chapter 3. Goodbye and God bless.